let's do it. I'm glad to be here with everybody.
Fantastic. All right. So start right off. VR is now here. There's all kinds of games already out there in all types of stores, which is fantastic. What has been so compelling? What has been this force that have compelled devs to jump in both feet or even small indie studios all the way full on to pivot and be like, all right, we're making a VR game and this is what we're doing?
The answer is probably different for every developer. I don't know if I can speak for everybody. I mean, some of them want to get into something that they see as being kind of like the mobile games industry, where nobody had really defined what was going to be successful, how to make a good game. There's a huge opportunity for them. I think that right now in the VR industry, there's a lot of room for a small developer to make a huge impact, and I think that the wins that you see now are going to get carried into the future. I mean, there's other developers where it just comes down to handing them huge piles of money, and that's why they're in VR. I won't say that that's the purest reason, but hey, if it gets a developer to be working in VR, that's the other end of the scale. And that's especially true, I think, for a lot of companies that are trying to figure out how they can justify the risk of working in virtual reality in these early days when it's not clear that there's going to be an immediate return on investment. And then, of course, there's people who just work on it because that's what they want to work on. Like, there are definitely a few people I know that are working on VR, making some of the best stuff, that don't really have a financial incentive to, they don't believe that VR is where they could be making the most money. The other two, kind of revolve around, VR is the best place to be to make money. Then there's a lot of people who just are there because that's the best place to build the kinds of things that they want to build, and they can't do that anywhere else. And for a lot of these people, they know full well they would be likely to make more money and be maybe more successful if they were working on a mobile game or a console game or a PC game with a larger audience, but you can't make people present in your game doing that. You can't make a lot of the types of things that people want to make. So everybody has a different reason.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, I've heard plenty of those around the industry, around ones from the artistic excitement to like, hey man, this is going to be the next big thing. This is a place to make my mark, right? Let's kind of pivot a little bit and go to this term juice. I don't know if you've heard around the game industry, is popularized by GDC Talk, like Human Games. It's basically adding these kind of very small, very easy touches for like feedback and feedback loops and things that kind of delight the player to make your simple game without adding much into something that's very, very delightful and awesome. And what kind of things have you seen around the industry to make these VR titles, these VR experiences juicy, as it were?
So we've had discussions about this a lot internally, and one of the conclusions we came to is that it really depends on what your audience is, and then like what the play, I guess what type of play are you doing? And I don't mean the genre, I mean like what types of games work well on mobile. And a lot of times they're things you can get into and out of pretty fast. They're things that have these really short loops that work inside those tight cycles. If you have a loop that takes a really long time to work on a mobile game, you're not likely to get as much value out of it because there's a lot of times where that just doesn't fit into the way that people play mobile games. Virtual reality, I think, has a little bit more diversity in that you're kind of committed to continuing to play virtual reality once you're all suited up. Once you've got your headset on, your computer running, and everything all strapped in, you don't necessarily have to make loops that are so tight. Now, you do still want to make those delightful things, add the juice. But I think that for a lot of games, you don't need to make things that have the kind of immediate dopamine hit feedback that you have in mobile games. You can afford to make interactions that take many seconds or even minutes to fully understand and interact, and to make, for example, objects in games. You don't have to make objects that are instantly delightful. Now, when we started working with Toybox, which is kind of our internal prototyping test bed for 3D motion controllers a few years ago, a lot of objects we were building, we were thinking, we have to make things that are instantly fun, that you're instantly getting, that you instantly understand. And what we were finding out is that some of the things that people liked the most in the long run were the things that were actually the hardest to use because they were the most satisfying to use. Now, that's typically not the case in a mobile game. You don't say, the things that are satisfying are the things that take them 10 minutes to master the use of. But like the slingshot, especially the slingshot when it was broken and hard to use. It's easier now, but when it was hard to use, it was one of the most satisfying things to be able to do right. And then same thing, like people are like, flipping lighters open is broken. It's like, no, it isn't. It's just really hard. I feel like there's a different set of things that work in virtual reality, and people shouldn't be afraid to make things that take time to master and work with, because once you're in VR, you're kind of there. And I think people want those kinds of deep interactions.
Absolutely, that's so interesting, and I definitely agree. My first experience with Toybox, and I was delighted to open up Iron Farm and get it and flick it open and be like, oh man, yeah, fire. So.
And the thing is, like, you got it. Some people just can't get the hang of it, but then when they do eventually figure it out, and I'm not saying that the lighter mechanics can't be improved, but when they get it, it's that much more interesting. And I think mobile games, most of the juice people talk about, it's really easy things, you know, that instantly give feedback to anybody, and you don't have to necessarily go that direction.
Very interesting. And speaking of user experience, and something that I found fascinating in VR is that there's this unexpected nature of users in VR, where people will actually stop and look at that uninteresting box that you put in the corner and look at it for 20 minutes, or they will, you know, go to the corner and duck under something, or try to grab everything in the space. Since they can pick up this chair, well, that means I must be able to pick up this box, and I should be able to throw this rubber ducky and do everything else, right?
People start to assume that the world works like the real world, and I mean, like, you've probably done the thing where you know, like, sit down, you sit, like, where you lean onto a table that's not there, or, you know, like, I've done that a bunch of times, and I'm in VR all the time, and I still do that. It's because you start to expect the virtual world to respond like the real world does, and that can pretty greatly increase the burden of making a game, because you can't just focus on the things you would normally focus on, you know, things you're meant to interact with. You kind of have to make the rest of the world react accordingly in some way, or at least limit the world so that you don't have to build all that stuff, or else people are going to notice, you know, like you said, they're going to be like, why can't I pick up this box? Why can't I push this chair around it?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. What have been some surprises as far as the types of games that are made, or type of interactions that are delightful, are interesting, are engaging in VR that just kind of came out of left field?
So I've been in the camp, like, I'm a traditional VR enthusiast, and then I believe that, like, VR is going to take over the entire world and be used for everything, not just for video games. At the same time, I'm a gamer, and I really think that if you had asked me a few years ago, I would have bet on gaming really being the thing driving virtual reality, at least in these early stages, because they're the people who are familiar with new technology, they are able to invest in the computing horsepower, they already have it. One of the most interesting things we've seen is looking at how people are spending time in virtual reality, and it turns out that some of the people who are spending the most time in VR are the people who don't fit the profile of a gamer at all. They're actually, like, there's a lot of people who are playing social applications, video applications, kind of more the passive experience type stuff, and they're spending as much or more time than most of the hardcore gamer people. And in many cases, they're on average, these people are spending a ton of time doing things that have nothing to do with games, and they're not the people you would have expected to get into virtual reality early on. That's especially true on the mobile side, where I think you're seeing more maybe non-tech enthusiasts come into it, like when Samsung started bundling Gear VR with their phones, like that brought in a huge audience. And it's interesting to look at what people who are brought into VR through a bundle do versus people who buy into it themselves. Because people who buy into it, they seem to mostly be gamers, early adopters, people playing games. But people who just come in and say, hey, here's 100, you're a normal person, here's 100 things, what do you want to do? It turns out that games are not near the top of that list. So that kind of came out of left field for me. I kind of expected that would happen much further down the road as things got better, as things got cheaper, but we're already starting to kind of see that happening. And I don't think that's bad for games. It's good for games, because, I mean, all these things are still using games technology. They kind of expand the audience for people who play things that would have been a game in the past. I mean, like, a lot of these passive experiences are really not much different than some of the more popular indie games you see out there in terms of being this big narrative experience that you're walked through. And so to see that normal people can also really find that powerful in VR it's been a little bit surprising, but I'm happy about it.
Yeah, it has been. I think I've had a lot of fun moments putting, like, my aunties and my mom and things like that. Family members that are not gamers that they see the kids playing the games and like, oh, that's nice. Then you're playing your video, and then they go and do whatever they're doing, and you put them in VR, and they're instantly like, woo! This kind of really just light up, and they're engaging. Right?
Well, especially when you show them things, and like. I've been amazed kind of how fast people grasp this. I mean, I'm used to being a gadget fiend and technology enthusiast who isn't able to convince most normal people I know of why technology is interesting. Like, I remember, back when I was using like Linux-based mobile internet devices like the Nokia N770. And I got it. I was like, this is incredible. This is going to change everything. And this was like pre-smartphone era. And then everyone got it way later when the tech got better. And so VR, I've always kind of felt that it was going to be a little like that, and that we were kind of in this N770 stage. But it turns out people get it. You're like, hey, look, like you put on this headset, and then you can chat with someone who's on the other side of the world, and or I can put you in this, and you can feel like you're under the ocean or relaxing on the beach. And they're like, I get this. This is really cool. I'm like, really? You get it? Let's do it.
I totally agree. Totally agree. One of the things that surprised me is how well third-person VR has worked. It's like, oh, that's pretty interesting, but I can play Chronos and play like Lucky's Tale, which I've been really delighted by, which some people have different reviews, I guess, of it, but I like it, damn it.
I like it.
We like it. So yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit. Like, what is like this? Some of the work that's been done as far as from a design perspective, because I think there's this. Maybe this perception that it's like, okay, you just put this camera here and it's third-person VR, and there you go, you're wearing a headset. And like, what are some of the kind of things that you've seen from a design perspective that have made third-person VR work?
I mean, for some games it can be sort of that simple, like especially if it's a game where you have a static viewpoint, basically treating the VR game like a board game where you can do anything, like a board game with magical pieces, like that type of stuff. It's like there's some stuff that's out there already, there's other stuff that's in the works. But for those games, it is pretty easy to kind of jump into third person. It just instantly makes sense. Actually, maybe you probably remember one of the first demos we showed. It's funny because people don't think of it as third person, but do you remember the Couch Nights demo that we were showing at the games?
Absolutely.
Okay, so a lot of people, what they don't realize is that like that was a third person game. Like you were sitting on a couch and you were controlling a character, running around the room and fighting another person in that space. Yeah. And people in that case think because it was a contemporary environment, it was a fake living room. They're like, oh, I get it. I am just supposed to be here and I'm controlling these other things. And I think that some people don't realize that when you replace the contemporary environment with something, like the entire game world itself, they're like, oh, but like, what's the benefit? It's like, well, the benefit is that you're actually there, you're seeing these things at the right scale, you're actually present inside of this virtual world. So you have third-person experiences that run that full gamut from these almost like super board games all the way up to being fully immersed in the world and building cameras that can move through those worlds and still keep people comfortable. And you're going to keep seeing these things evolve, and these are also going to translate over into augmented reality once the technology becomes feasible there. What people should remember is that these games that are made to work in third person, especially the things like Couch Nights or Air Mac or Defense Grid, where you've kind of got these super board games, those are going to translate into augmented reality hardware really well in the future.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, there's all this talk about VR versus AR, and I think every design decision that's accomplished in VR that works out well, a lot of them will transfer to AR very successfully.
Definitely. I mean, augmented reality and virtual reality are really just different places on the same spectrum. And I think that in the future, you're going to spend a lot of time kind of being in different places on that spectrum. You're going to be bringing minimal notifications in at one time. You're going to be in a fully virtual world at another time. And at other times, you're going to be mixing and mashing elements of the virtual world, the real world, and other parts of the real world on the other side of the world, all together into this really cool experience. And a lot of these things people are figuring out right now in VR are also going to apply to augmented reality. So it's going to be really, really cool to see how that stuff evolves.
Very, very cool, very awesome. As we kind of wind down here, I kind of want to ask a couple more things. One, do you see a genre that's maybe kind of fell out of favor or that's been kind of abandoned in the game industry at large, maybe making a comeback in VR?
I mean, so the problem is the genres that have fallen out of favor. I don't know if they're necessarily great fits for VR. I just really want them to exist. I want more pirate games.
Yes.
What happened to pirate economy simulations and stuff? But
Cymatic VR.
I mean, that's the obvious fit. I think that one of the most obvious ones, and VR can't really take credit for this, but the simulation genre, and I don't mean silly simulators. Nothing wrong with silly simulators. Yeah. But I mean the serious flight simulation, space simulation stuff. I feel like they fell out of favor for a few years. There was not a lot going on in that area. The last few years have seen a huge resurgence of interest in those areas, and I think VR is part of that. I think it's going to continue to be a big part of that. because it's such an obvious fit. You know, it's a genre that's made literally around trying to replicate reality as closely as possible, and the scale, well, you know, in the case of a space sim, maybe not exactly, but you know, you're trying to replicate the scale, you're trying to replicate the functionality, you're trying to make the person really feel like they're in a vehicle or, you know, doing something that is quasi-realistic. So I feel like that genre is gonna be really helped by VR over the next few years, and it's gonna let people who normally wouldn't get into it, get into it. Like, there's a lot of people I know who wouldn't play a car racing game on a monitor or with a traditional gamepad, but if you put them in VR, you know, with the steering wheel, and they really feel like they're in the car, there's a lot of people who are, there's a lot more people who are interested in that out in the world, I think.
Yeah, definitely would agree. My hours in Elite Dangerous attest to that, I think. So, Fish, Blessing, what's been the most exciting gaming experience for you in VR that you can talk about at this point?
I mean, you know me. I don't play. I try not. I try not to play favorites. Partly because I just feel like it's the right thing to do, but also because every time I do, I get angry emails from people. No, not angry emails. Encouraging emails from people saying, "I encourage you to think about my game as well. Don't you realize that my game is actually better in that genre? Why don't you remember that game?" I'd say there's a lot of stuff I've seen. There's a lot of stuff I've seen that I'm really excited about, but I'm really excited about what we're going to be showing, like what we're going to be showing in the summer, like stuff that we've been building for Touch. We've kind of been holding back on Touch right now in terms of showing a lot of the content that we've been building, that some of our partners have been building, that third parties have been building. So I'm really excited to show people that. That's kind of some of the most exciting stuff that I'm seeing being built right now.
Very cool, very cool. Well, excellent. Thank you so much for your time, Paul. Appreciate it.
Thank you guys. And normally I would talk to people, but I've got to like run out of here because I've got a meeting. So.
All right, he has to go. Don't swarm him. And Palmer's away. All right, very good. Excellent. Thank you so much.